Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Imagine an opposition leader who once represented hope and change, but now, in front of the whole country, is completely broken. This is exactly what happened when Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, suffered an emotional breakdown during his recent speech. This shocking moment shocked the nation to its core and called into question his abilities as a leader. How did it happen that the person who is supposed to inspire ended up in such a state? What was the reason for this public breakdown of Starmer, and what does it mean for the future of the Labour Party? Let's delve into the chaos that has just erupted and see what it says about the current state of British politics. Should the British prepare for nuclear war?
For the third year running, Putin did not attend this summit. He is the author of his own exile. And on day 1,000 of Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, I say again, end the war, get out of Ukraine.
Should Brits prepare for nuclear war?
Look, there's irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia, and that is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We're now on day 1,000 of that conflict. That's 1,000 days of Russian aggression, 1,000 days of sacrifice in Ukraine. We have stood with Ukraine from the start, and I've been doubling down in my clear message that we need to ensure that Ukraine has what is needed for as long as is needed to win this war against Putin.
Starmer tried to show his sincerity, but in the end he made the grossest mistakes, saying that 90% of the people affected by the changes in the pension system allegedly knew about it in advance. He actually blamed those who were disappointed for their own troubles. The public is not asleep. She saw through his manipulations and stopped trusting the rumors about him. The Labour Party began to move away from him, and there was real chaos at headquarters, emergency meetings, tense arguments, and a complete lack of clarity. Despite the urgent warnings of his advisors about the consequences of his apologies, Starmer continued to insist on his own, and this raises serious doubts about whether he listened to their wisdom. But that's not all. Starmer and the Labour Party are on the brink of a deep crisis that could undermine the very foundations of the party. What if I told you that Starmer's next move would make his apologies simply paltry? Get ready, because we are about to plunge into a disaster in the National Health Service, which has already seriously damaged the reputation of the Labour Party.
Does he understand why the people of these islands, especially those of us in Scotland, treat him with such contempt?
Mr Speaker, before the election, this Prime Minister said he would lower energy bills by £300. Since he took office, they've gone up by £149. He said he would protect the winter fuel payment, but now he's in power, he's stripped it off our pensioners. And he said he lined up for many photos with waspy women, saying he'd have their backs, and he's just betrayed them in the most scandalous way possible. This is now the defining characteristic of this one-trick phony Prime Minister who says one thing and does another. In Scotland, the SNP are 16 points ahead in the polls. Does he understand? Does he understand?
Do you remember what grandiose promises Starmer made about the National Health Service during his election campaign? He made impressive figures, £3 billion in 5 years, and it inspired hope in the hearts of millions. Everyone was waiting for the increase in funding for the National Health Service, which is in great need of support to finally begin. But when the financial reports were published, shock and disappointment swept the country. These promises turned out to be simply unrealistic. The country couldn't afford what he promised. Starmer began to back away from his commitments, and key promises regarding the National Health Service simply evaporated. He seemed to hope that people would forget about his loud statements, but it was naive. The unions of the National Health Service were furious, and who could blame them? These are the very people who spared no effort working on the front lines, especially during the pandemic, and now they feel betrayed and deceived. The opposition parties rejoiced as if they had an incredible opportunity to attack, and Starmer himself provided them with all the necessary arguments for this.
They used to ask those questions. They used to ask those questions from this sort of area with very many MPs not so long ago.
The Labour Party is losing confidence in the healthcare system, and more people are beginning to doubt that this party can be trusted to run the National Health Service. Analysts predict that this negative perception will drag the Labour Party to the bottom for a long time, undermining its reputation on health issues. It feels like Starmer has dealt a crushing blow to one of the strongest foundations of the Labour Party, and this is just the beginning of the disaster. Starmer is going to make a series of policy changes that will shock many and could cause a real riot. The National Health Service is just the first domino to fall, and believe me, there are many more to come.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to misrepresent me to make his point. I don't need to misrepresent him to make my point. Yes. The truth is, he didn't think this through. Cutting winter fuel payments isn't just callous. It may not make savings. It could actually cost us all more. And that's not the only policy which is making things worse. The Chancellor's budget is a body blow to family businesses and also charities. Marie Curie have warned that Labour's budget will cost them nearly £3 million a year. This is a cancer charity saying they have no option but to reduce services.
Starmer's recent decision on immigration was a real stab in the back for many, causing a storm of indignation within the Labour Party. This new tough stance has led to threats of resignation from several left-wing MPs, highlighting deep divisions within the party. Progressive voters feel cheated and betrayed, and this has led to a sharp drop in support for Labour. Starmer's attempt to please the various factions have completely failed, and now he stands on the edge of a precipice. The right-wing media does not miss the opportunity to criticize him, while he has alienated a significant part of his base, which puts him in an extremely vulnerable position. He is trying his best to keep the party united, but the situation is becoming increasingly tense. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch does not mince words, sharply criticizing Starmer's policy and calling it a slap in the face for the British people.
Hear me when I say this. No more money without reform. I'm not prepared to see even more of your money spent on agency staff who cost £5,000 a shift, on appointment letters which arrive after the appointment, or on paying for people to be stuck in hospital just because they can't get the care they need in the community.
The change in immigration policy has exposed deep divisions within the Labour Party, and this has become a real test for its unity. The future of the party is hanging in the balance, and the coming months will be crucial. While Starmer is trying to deal with immigration issues, a looming financial crisis is already looming on the horizon. The promises that the Labour Party lavished during the campaign are starting to come apart at the seams. The economic situation in the UK is catastrophic. High inflation and a shrinking economy. The Labour Party's grandiose plans now look not just unrealistic, they seem fantastic. Rachel Reeves was forced to present a budget that is radically different from all previous Labour commitments. No tax cuts, minimal cost increases, and even a reduction in winter fuel benefits for retirees.
You have said that you would rather a family member die in the NHS than have them treated privately. Now, I find this
No, I
claim...
didn't say that. I did not say that.
You did make a point, though, that you'd choose NHS care over private care.
Yeah, please, when you finish your question, but I did not say that.
I find this slightly disingenuous.
I didn't say it.
Okay. Well, you said you would rather the NHS than private, and I feel like that's disingenuous because, A, you have talked about leaning into the private sector to bring down the waiting list, and B, if you're so committed to the NHS as it is, how can you be the man to bring radical reform to it?
Well, I think as we discussed last time, as you know, my wife works in the NHS. She's in one of the big London hospitals, so this is a constant discussion between us. My mum was a nurse.
The increase in state insurance contributions for enterprises has caused a real storm of discontent. and critics are not shy about calling it a tax on jobs. Businessmen and trade unions are opposed to this policy, arguing that it will lead to massive layoffs and cause serious damage to workers. This situation raises deep doubts about the ability of Starmer and his team to manage finances, and some compare it to the dark pages of the Labour Party's history when it faced financial crises. But that's not all. Starmer is facing an even more serious crisis as the Labour Party changes its foreign policy in an effort to establish closer economic ties with China. This decision could turn into a real disaster for the party, and many are wondering, will Starmer be able to cope with this challenge? What do you think about this video? Share your thoughts in the comments. See you later.